This is a show about censorship. No, wait, no, don't run away. No. I know that can be a very touchy subject, and once the arguments get started, all the gray areas fade away, and everybody ends up in a big fight. And needless to say, the party breaks up. Let's try this from a different angle. There's an area of study I'm trying to promote called stupid history. Learning about the past doesn't have to be about memorizing dates, who fought what wars, and who was king or queen or emperor or when. Humans are dumb creatures, and that dumbness is always on display. And this can be really, really funny. If more of this stuff was taught in history classes, I think we'd have more historians and writers and people curious about the human condition over the ages. Now let me give you an idea. Instead of going through all the details of the War of the Roses, include this in a history lesson instead. In Britain, in the 16th and 17th centuries, it was common knowledge that ground bits of mummies stolen from tombs in Egypt was good for you. Mix in a little chocolate and you have a nice little snack. So, yeah, cannibalism in powdered form used to be a thing for the Brits. And this is also true. This is why there aren't that many ancient mummies around anymore. They were all eaten. Here's another. Andrew Jackson was the 7th president of the United States. When he died in June 1845, his beloved parrot was thrown out of his funeral because the thing kept swearing. Oh, one more. Jack Daniels, the bourbon guy, he died of an infected toe. He stubbed it very badly when he kicked a safe to which he'd forgotten the combination. So you see what I mean? And here on Uncharted Crime and Mayhem in the Music Industry, we talk about some seriously grisly and awful things. It's perhaps time to try something a little lighter for a change. And yes, this episode is about censorship, but it's also stupid history. It's episode 39. And boy, this one is dumb. And I mean really dumb. It's the insane true story of the Kingsmen and their song, Louie, Louie. Here is the subject of this program. Sing along if you know the words. And that's the problem. No one seems to know what they are. And, well, you'll see. Recorded in one take with one microphone at a studio in Portland, Oregon on April 6th, 1963. That's the Kingsmen and their version of Louie, Louie, perhaps the greatest one-hit wonder in all of rock. It certainly is the greatest garage rock song of all time. It's been covered hundreds and hundreds of times by some of the biggest names in music. In fact, it may be the most covered rock song ever, with somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 covers known to exist. Now, wait, you're probably thinking, he's going to do an entire true crime episode on one song? Yes, I am, because this story is so gloriously stupid, and because it caused all sorts of mayhem over 2 years in the 1960s. This story reached the very top of U.S. law enforcement. Louie, Louie, at one point, was called the most pornographic song ever made. It was banned, supposedly, by the state of Indiana. And the Kingsmen and their work was investigated inside and out by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI. Listen, I promised you mayhem, and you're going to get it. Let's start with Richard Berry. He was from rural Oklahoma. He began singing with various doo-wop and R&B groups in the early 1950s. In 1955, he heard this. It's called El Loco Cha-Cha-Cha by Renee Touzette. At this time, Richard was the featured singer in a 10-piece group called Rick Rolera and the Rhythm Rockers. Starting in the summer of 1955, they played an R&B version of that Renee Tuzet calypso thingy. Richard really loved the chord progression and started messing around with it. There's apparently a little bit of Chuck Berry's Havana Moon in here.
Me all alone with jug of rum, me stand and wait for boat to come. It's long the night, it's quiet the dark. The boat she late since 12 o'clock.
And for some reason, Richard was also thinking about this song from Frank Sinatra.
I could tell you a lot, but you've gotta be true to your code.
Now, I don't hear it, but whatever. Lyrically, maybe, in the sense that it's about late-night drinking. Wait, that's in Louie, Louie? Well, it is a sea shanty sort of thing with lots of regret. Usually comes with alcohol. Anyway, Berry wrote the song in 1955, scribbling down some early lyrics on a paper bag. It was recorded in April 1956 in Hollywood. In April 1957, it was released on the Flip label, credited to Richard Berry and the Pharaohs. The title of the song? Well, Richard had a favorite bartender, and his name was, you guessed it, Louie.
Louie, Louie, me gotta go. 3 nights and days, me sail the sea, me think of girls constantly.
No one thought too much of Louie, Louie. It was released as a B-side to Berry's band's version of You Are My Sunshine. And let me tell you something, the A-side was not a hit. But then a San Francisco DJ decided to see what was on the other side. The phone started ringing, and the song became a minor regional hit in the Pacific Northwest in the fall of '57. Meanwhile, Berry had sold his portion of the publishing to Louie Louie, along with 4 other songs, to a guy named Max Fertig for $750. Berry needed the money to finance his first album. And frankly, it did seem like a very safe bet because, again, Louie Louie is a B-side. And it wasn't worth anything as a hit, right? By 1959, it was a dead song, as far as sales and record charts were concerned. But because it had become a local radio hit, local bands in the Pacific Northwest started playing Louie Louie at local schools and bars and restaurants and fairs. An outfit called the Thunderbirds developed a slightly porno version that they jam on for 20 minutes or longer. And with maybe a dozen local groups all playing the song, Louie Louie burned out after a year or so. Then, in 1961, Rockin' Robin Roberts and his band, another local outfit, brought the song back, releasing it as a single and hyping it as the rock and roll song of the Pacific Northwest. But now it was different. It was starting to sound like garage rock. Now that's pretty cool for 1961, but nobody cared. There were a couple of reissues of Rockin' Robin Roberts' version, but nothing worked. Then we come to April 6th, 1963. The Kingsmen were a typical pickup band, the kind found all over Portland, Oregon. At the center of this 5-piece group was Lynn Easton, a drummer, and Jack Eli on vocals and guitar, who at 18 was also the oldest. Organist Don Colucci was, I think, 16. Their first gigs were in 1957. Their first recording was an unreleased instrumental entitled Peter Gunn Rock. Again, nothing to get excited about, nothing to worry about. But the Kingsmen had a champion and a guy named Ken Chase. Ken Chase was a DJ on KISN, one of the local AM Top 40 stations, and he owned a 150-person capacity teen nightclub called The Chase. The Kingsmen were basically the house band, playing Thursdays through Mondays. By the spring of 1963, they'd been playing Louie Louie for years, drifting closer to the Robin Roberts version than the original by Chuck Berry. It wasn't uncommon for them to jam on the song for 90 minutes in a row, all for the kids at the club. And they were playing it wrong. Instead of going, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, as Barry and Roberts and many others had done, the Kingsmen, for some reason, changed it to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Ken Chase soon became the manager of the Kingsmen. That's when the group started after Chase to get the band some recording time and a record deal. Chase booked the band into a studio for 1 hour starting at 10 a.m. on April 6, 1963. The goal was to create an audition tape so maybe the Kingsmen could get a gig on a cruise ship or something. They had 3 songs that they wanted to get on tape. With little time, the band recorded 2 instrumentals, each in 1 take, and 1 vocal. They got half a take to set levels for vocals and instruments. Then they started again and got a full take. And after that, their 60 minutes was up. Now, technically, this was not a good session. The tempo for their vocal was all over the place. It's pretty shambolic and loose. And the song is loaded with mistakes. At about 54 seconds into the song, drummer Easton misses a cue because he clicks his drumsticks together, drops them, and then swears loudly enough to be picked up by the mic. Listen carefully.
Oh, baby.
He never quite recovers, and the tempo is even more shaky after that. Then, at around 1:58, Jack Eli, the singer, starts his vocals too early after the solo. Drummer Lynn Easton tried to cover up the flub with an extra drum fill. The other problem with the song is that no one could make out any of the lyrics. There were several reasons for that. First, they only had a single microphone hanging from a tall boom stand. That meant singer Jack Eli had to stand in a circle of musicians, throw his head all the way back, and sing almost straight up into the microphone. The other issue was Jack's teeth. He was fitted with a huge pair of 1963 braces. They were big and clunky and made it hard for him to form the words properly. Oh, and the day before, he'd just had them tightened, and they were very uncomfortable. Whatever he said came out all slurred. And to be close enough to the mic to be heard over all the instrumentation, he had to stand on his tiptoes. So that's a pretty unnatural position. Yeah, his diction wasn't the best. And remember, the Kingston had just performed the song for 90 straight minutes the night before, so everybody was pretty burned out on it. We do know this. Jack followed Richard Berry's lyrics, the original lyrics, very closely. There was some deviation, but not much. Now, hold that thought. Finally, after about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, it's over. The Kingsmen wanted to do it again, but they'd run out of time, their 1 hour allotment. They'd run out of money, each of the guys had thrown in $10, and Ken Chase, the local DJ and producer of the session, tried to smooth things over by saying, it's just fine, it's real, it's authentic, it's got great energy. So it was time to pack up and go home. 1,000 copies were pressed up, and nothing happened for over a year. A little label called Jordan released it before the song was handed over to a slightly bigger label called Wand. Wand was run by Florence Greenberg, and she hated the Kingsmen song. "It was forced down my throat by friends," she said. "I was ashamed to put it out." A&M Records declined to get involved, saying that the song was too long, 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and out of tune, which we really can't dispute. And the general public didn't care about it either. Add up all the sales from those 2 initial pressings on those 2 different labels, and the Kingsmen sold about 600 copies. All right, well, another rock and roll dream dashed. But then some extra special beneficial mayhem kicked in. And thanks to a joke played by somebody in Boston, Louie was put on the path to fame and infamy. In the fall of 1962, Arnie Ginsberg went to work as usual. He was the evening DJ at WMEX in Boston, and his show, Night Train, was the biggest in the city. Everybody listened to Woo Woo Ginsberg. That day, in October 1963, he ran into one of the local record label pitchmen, guys who brought new singles around to the radio station every week. "You gotta hear this," the label guy said. "You will not believe how bad it is." So he played the Kingsmen Louie, and Ginsberg agreed. "This is really, really bad. In fact, it's so bad that I'm going to play this as part of my regular feature, Worst Record of the Week." And he did. But a weird thing happened. The audience loved the record and kept requesting it. He got up to 50 calls a day from record stores asking about the song. And by the end of the month, the Kingsmen's Louie was threatening to make the national singles charts. Well, great! Well, there was a problem. Paul Revere and the Raiders had also recorded Louie, and their version had its own momentum. And the performance was a lot more polished. In November and December 1963, the two versions of Louie vied for position on the national charts. When the dust settled, the Raiders' record label eventually capitulated. The Kingsmen's record peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Top 100. There are rumblings that it sold more than enough to reach number 1, but the powers that be thought it was too raw and too vulgar a performance to be allowed to reach the top of the charts. Still, it would stay in the top 10 for the next couple of months. And by April 1964, a year after that one-hour recording session in Portland, the Kingsmen's Louie had sold about 1 million copies. It was a number 1 hit on other charts, and in other countries too, including Canada. And they just squeaked in too. Had they been a few months later, the Kingsmen would have been completely destroyed by this new group from England called the Beatles. But as it turns out, their timing was perfect. So, a nice run, some nice money was made, and it was time to move on. Perhaps it was time for the Kingsmen to break up. There was a tussle between Jack Ely and Lynn Easton over who owned the name the Kingsmen, so things looked rather bleak. But for some reason, Louie just would not die. It kept hanging in on the lower regions of the singles charts for close to 2 years. And here is when we finally get to the real mayhem. It turns out that the Kingsmen's version of Louie was said to have dirty, obscene, and pornographic lyrics. Nobody could make out what Jack Ely was singing on that 1963 recording, which meant it was possible to project whatever you wanted to when it came to the lyrics. Dirty lyrics? Okay, good idea. Let's make some up. Where did this story about the dirty lyrics start? Well, no one really knows. But because rock was still viewed with suspicion and derision by the establishment, because polite society was still bent out of shape about sex, and because rock fans loved the idea of something subversive and dirty upsetting parents everywhere, well, once the story started to spread, it quickly got out of control. The earliest evidence of outrage we can find is a letter written to the governor of Indiana in January 1963. It came from 2 teenagers from the town of Frankfort, 1 boy, 1 girl, alerting Governor Matthew Welsh of the dangers of Louie. At issue was the second verse, which was heard to include the line, "Each night at 10, I'd lay her again. F you, girl, all the way." Oh dear. This, of course, was incorrect. The actual line is, "3 days and nights I sailed the sea. Me think of you, girl, oh constantly." But never mind the truth. People heard what they wanted to hear. Governor Welsh was immediately concerned. He sent an assistant down to the nearest record store, and with that 45 in his hands, he sat down to listen to the song over and over and over. He played it at different speeds, but he wasn't sure what he was hearing. But just in case, he played a call to the Federal Communications Commission, concerned that a dirty record was being played on the radio. He also played a call to the Indiana Broadcasters Association and requested that the song be taken off the air. The Indianapolis Morning Star carried the story on January 23, 1963, and the headline read, "Record held naughty, air ban asked." The 2 Frankfurt teens were very happy. They wrote another letter to Governor Welsh. "You should be given a round of applause for your strong stand against this record. Much is written about the declining morals of the American teenager. However, most people don't realize that if the morals are declining, and I doubt if they are, it is because of smut such as this record put out by adults whose only concern is making a fast buck. The governor got other letters of support. Dear Governor, I realize that your action will be questioned by some, but it will be appreciated by a host of people who still believe in moral principles and Christian dignity. Here's another. Honorable Sir, we are glad the protest about the record came from Frankfurt, as our son, a young minister there, is trying hard to make the city a cleaner place for youth. But then there were also letters like this. Welsh, are you out of your mind? There's nothing wrong with Louie. Signed, Furious. But Governor Welsh was convinced that something was up. So he brought in a deputy prosecutor named Leroy New to listen to the record with him. He was also unsure of what he heard, but it was enough for him to consider filing obscenity charges. The thing he was most offended by was the song's raw and raucous sound, calling it an abomination of out-of-tune guitars and overbearing jungle rhythm and clanging cymbals. In other words, forget what was actually being sung. The song was so shambolic that it was enough to feel that something was wrong about it. And within days, Louie was being investigated by the FCC, the U.S. Postal Service, and, wait for it, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. On February 7, 1964, a letter was received by Attorney General Bobby Kennedy. It was sent by an irate father. Dear Mr. Kennedy, who do you turn to when your teenage daughter buys and brings home pornographic or obscene materials being sold alongside objects directed and aimed at the teenage market in every city, village, and record shop in this nation? My daughter brought home a record of Louie, and I, after reading that the record had been banned from being played on the air because it was obscene, proceeded to try to decipher the jumble of words. The lyrics are so filthy that I cannot enclose them in this letter. He concludes, we all know that there are obscene materials available for those who seek it, but when they start sneaking in this material in the guise of the latest teen rock and roll hit record, these morons have gone too far. This land of ours is headed for an extreme state of moral degradation, what with this record, the biggest hit movies, and the sex and violence exploited on TV. How can we stamp out this menace? Kennedy, following protocol, turned the letter over to the Justice Department and the FBI. And in February 1964, they opened a file on the Kingsman single. A copy of Louie was sent to an FBI lab in Tampa. They also acquired copies of the official lyrics from the song's music publisher so they could follow along. They also somehow acquired a dirty version of the lyrics. Actually, multiple versions of the lyrics, many of which were created by college students as a joke. There's one story of an unidentified student in Florida who wrote up all the lyrics and then sold them to fellow students. It's unclear if that person was ever questioned. The FBI was concerned that the song violated the Interstate Transportation of Obscene Matter statute because it was being distributed to radio stations and jukeboxes and record stores across the country. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was most interested because he believed that rock and roll was a, quote, menace to morals. If such subversive things as a dirty song were allowed to exist, then this, he believed, would create social instability and subversive thoughts and actions with young people that may hurt the status quo. Things got weird very quickly. A TV crew tipped off that the original complaint letter had been written by a couple of Frankfurt teens in Indiana showed up at their high school. They couldn't find the kids because they hid out in the principal's office. Meanwhile, this myth of dirty lyrics, picked up speed. And it wasn't long before someone started circulating what was purported to be the real words to the song, and yes, they were quite dirty. Complaints started coming in from Detroit, Shreveport, and San Diego. And this was amazing how quickly this spread in the era before the internet. The Kingsmen, for their part, were aghast and told anyone who would listen that their version contained nothing obscene. The publisher of the song offered $1,000 to anyone who could prove that there was anything dirty about the lyrics in the Kingsmen's version of Louie. For 3 weeks, there was a serious investigation. As the FBI worked on the file in Tampa, staffers at the FCC mounted a parallel study. They played the song at 45 RPM, at 33 1/3, at 16 RPM, and at 78 RPM. After all that, they declared that the song was, and this is a quote, unintelligible at any speed. The case was dropped by the FCC, the Postal Service, and the Justice Department on February 11, 1964, just 3 weeks after this panic began. The FBI's laboratory investigation into the song concluded on May 20th, 1964. The final report said labs in Indiana, California, and Florida were unable to determine if Louie Louie contained obscene lyrics. The net result? The publicity only made the record more popular. However, that wasn't the end of it. Hoover and the FBI really thought that they were onto something. They considered searching for the person responsible for writing the unofficial dirty lyrics. Never mind that those lyrics didn't appear on the record. In April 1965, the Bureau opened the investigation again because it kept getting letters featuring transcripts of lyrics that people thought they were hearing in the Kingsman recording. For example, the General Federation of the Women's Club of Flint, Michigan refused to give up, and in June 1965, the head of the organization wrote to the FBI director, I quote, "I can realize that you are unable to comment on your current investigations, but dauntless we are, and we now have in our possession a recording made directly from the Kingsman's Louie Louie. The 45 RPM Louie was played at 78 RPM, taped at twice the regular speed, and then slowed down so it now plays somewhere between 45 and 33.5 RPM. At this speed, the obscene articulation is clearer." On another occasion, an anonymous concerned citizen mailed a copy of the single along with a typed-out version of the dirty lyrics, asserting that all could be heard clearly if the record was played at 33 1/3. This went to the FBI. Obviously, this person heard something that 3 FBI labs and the FCC could not. Hoover continued to see letters of complaint, and they were written by everyone from concerned students to grandparents to helpful snitches. Agents were dispatched to interview an executive of Wand Records, one of the record labels that issued Louie Louie. Attempts were also made at getting isolated vocals of the master recording, but that was impossible because no such thing existed from a 2-track mono recording. Some went to Kingsman shows, hoping to catch the group singing the dirty version. The one person the FBI never talked to was Ken Chase, the DJ who oversaw the original recording session on April 6, 1963. And incredibly, no one ever talked to Jack Eli, the singer. He left the band in August 1963, months before all this started. For the entire time, the FBI never bothered to find out whose vocals were on that record. They just assumed it was Lynn Easton, the drummer, because he assumed control after Eli quit. They did, however, interview Richard Berry, and that, of course, resulted in nothing. The FBI continued to investigate Louie Louie until November 1965, 2.5 years after the song was recorded, generating more than 250 pages of findings as part of Hoover's mission of combating merchants of filth. And after spending an estimated $8 million on the project, that's more than $60 million in today's dollars, the ultimate result into all this was nothing. Meanwhile, Louie Louie just kept getting more popular. The Kingsman version sold at least 3 million more copies, and dozens of acts kept covering it. Like I said at the beginning, there may be as many as 2,000 covers of Louie Louie out there. And the story isn't over yet. We have to consider the legal mayhem unleashed on poor Richard Berry. We'll look at that in a moment. The FBI was done investigating the Kingsman's version of Louie Louie by the end of 1965. And by then, the song's iconic status was well on its way to being established. It was simple and fun to play. It was gloriously dumb and moronic, yet profound in the way it fit into any situation. And it would be soon considered the seminal garage rock song and one of the most important rock singles of all time. Louie Louie was covered by the Kinks, Otis Redding, Frank Zappa, Iggy Pop, Patti Smith, Motorhead, Bruce Springsteen, The Clash, The Fall, Lou Reed, David Bowie, Blondie, Black Flag, Barry White, The Grateful Dead, R.E.M., Husker Du, Meatloaf, Joan Jett, The Bangles, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, The Cult, Jimmy Buffett, The Pretenders, The Dave Matthews Band, Neil Diamond, Warren Zevon, The Guess Who, The Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Joel, Jack White, and hundreds of others. There were rock versions, reggae versions, jazz interpretations, dance covers, marching band arrangements, and rap iterations. Even Lisa Simpson covered Louie Louie with the Springfield Children's Band. It's been used in commercials, TV, and movies. In fact, there's that scene in Animal House where the boys from Delta House drunkenly sing and dance to the song, which is pretty interesting, but we have to remember that the movie was set in 1962 and the song was recorded in 1963, so a bit of an anachronistic problem there, but never mind. There are compilations of Louie Louie featuring nothing but Louie Louie. The song has been covered in Spanish and French and Italian and Japanese, Finnish, Greek, and Russian. There are answer songs and sequels with titles like Louie Louise, I Want to Louie Louie All Night Long, and Louie Go Home. There are parodies, including a Star Wars version called Jedi Jedi.
I said a Jedi. Oh, baby, I said we gotta go. We stop all the droids and protect the queen. Then exodus to Tatooine.
The Black Panthers turned Louie Louie into a protest song in the 1960s. The tune has been used for a couple of Christmas songs. It's shown up in video games. It's a popular ringtone. It's been sampled for use in other songs. And the state of Washington once tried to make it the official song of the entire, state of Washington. For a while, there was a summer music and arts festival called Louie Fest in Tacoma, Washington. There have been Louie Louie-themed parades and street parties. There's even something called International Louie Louie Day every April 11th, which is Richard Berry's birthday. Support for this comes from the Louie Louie Advocacy and Music Appreciation Society. And then there's its influence on garage rock itself, something that eventually gave way to proto-punk and punk rock. But the song is also everywhere, if you know how and where to listen. Here's a little bit of Boston. Now, you would think that Richard Berry, the guy who wrote the song, would be a very happy and rich man. Well, no. In 1959, long before Louie Louie took off, remember, Berry sold his rights to the song for $750 to pay for his first record and for his wedding. This wasn't uncommon at the time. Pop songs were considered evanescent things, big for a moment and then soon useless and forgotten. Back in 1959, everybody knew that rock and roll was a fad. It had zero longevity. Berry watched the Louie Louie controversy from the sidelines, but there was nothing he could do. He continued to write songs and perform in after-hours clubs, but with very little success. He went back to school and learned to become a data entry clerk. But then, one day in 1984, his neighbor's pit bull got loose and attacked him. As he tried to get away, he was bitten and fell against a car, destroying some discs in his lower spine. He was off work for so long that he lost his job. Shortly, Berry was surviving on a welfare check of $240 a month and living at his mother's house in South Central LA. One day, though, he got a phone call. California Coolers, a beverage company, wanted to use Louie Louie in a TV commercial. In their search to get the rights, the company's lawyers discovered that they needed Berry to sign off on things. California Coolers contacted an artists' rights society. They tracked down Berry and sent a music rights expert named Chuck Rubin out to meet him. Berry told Rubin how much he sold the rights to the song for back in 1959. Rubin told Berry that it was possible to launch legal action to get the rights back. Berry agreed to try, and for the next 2 years, Rubin fought on Berry's behalf to reacquire the rights to Louie Louie. And he was successful. On January 1st, 1986, nearly 30 years after he gave up the song, Berry was granted 75% ownership in Louie Louie. He never got any back payments, but going forward, He made a lot. And it was all triggered by this commercial.
Over 20 years of research and development have gone into every bottle of California Cooler. California Cooler, the real stuff.
Barry reemerged as a performer, playing sets all over the world. His last performance of the song was with the Pharaohs and the Dreamers as part of a benefit concert in Long Beach, California in February 1996. After that, Barry's health began to suffer. He died of heart failure on January 23, 1997 at the age of 61. And if you go to the Locust Hill Baptist Church in Extension, Louisiana, the town where Barry was born, you'll find a commemorative marker dedicated to Richard Barry and Louie Louie. Louie Louie is the most covered rock song of all time. We'll just say that. And one of the most influential of all time. And it wouldn't have become that if not for all the mayhem that surrounded it. If you have any questions or comments about anything you hear on this podcast, shoot me an email, alan@alancross.ca. We can also meet up on all the social media sites, along with my website, ajournalofmusicalthings.com. It's updated with music news and recommendations every single day. There's the free daily newsletter you should get, and please check out my other podcast, The Ongoing History of New Music, which deals with all kinds of rock music topics. And there are hundreds and hundreds of episodes that you can all enjoy for free. See you next time for more stories of crime and mayhem in the music industry. Episodes arrive every 2 weeks. Technical production is by Rob Johnston. I'm Alan Cross.